The perfect illusion. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the sprawling estate. Emma sat on the veranda, a glass of wine in her hand, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The mansion behind her was as grand as ever, filled with ornate furniture, marble floors, and an air of opulence. But no amount of luxury could quell the growing storm inside her. Emma and Nathan had been married for 6 years. To the outside world, their marriage was the epitome of perfection. Two successful individuals living a life most could only dream of. Nathan was a thriving businessman with charm and charisma that could light up any room. Emma, a former journalist, had put her career on hold to support Nathan and focus on their home. Together, they were a power couple, or so it seemed. As the warm breeze brushed against her skin, Emma's thoughts were interrupted by the faint hum of Nathan's car pulling into the driveway. She glanced at the clock. 10:42 p.m. Late again. Nathan stepped out of his sleek black car, his movements precise and deliberate, as though he knew he was being watched. Dressed in a crisp suit, his tie slightly loosened, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the world was his for the taking. "Long day?" Emma asked as he approached, her tone light, but tinged with an undercurrent of frustration. Nathan flashed his practiced smile, the one that could disarm anyone. "You know how it is. Meetings ran late. Nothing exciting." Emma nodded, her smile polite but hollow. This had become their routine. Short conversations, filled with pleasantries but devoid of depth. She hated how distant they'd become, how the man she had once trusted with her soul now felt like a stranger. But she convinced herself it was just a phase. Work stress, she thought. He'll come around. As Nathan disappeared inside, Emma lingered on the veranda, staring at the stars. Her instincts whispered that something was off, but she silenced them, unwilling to confront the possibility that her perfect life might be built on a lie. The days turned into weeks, and the signs became harder to ignore. Late nights, vague explanations, and a growing sense of detachment from Nathan weighed heavily on Emma. The final straw came one evening when she accidentally glanced at his phone as it buzzed on the countertop. A message flashed across the screen. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect. L." Emma's heart stopped. She stared at the screen, her mind racing to comprehend what she had just seen. She could no longer deny the truth that had been staring her in the face. Nathan was having an affair. Her hands trembled as she placed the phone back where it was, careful not to let him suspect anything. That night, as Nathan slept soundly beside her, Emma lay awake, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of determination coursed through her veins. She needed to confront him, but she also needed a plan, a way to reclaim her life. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bouquet of roses Nathan had left for her. A gesture that once would have warmed her heart now felt like an insult. She clenched her jaw, her decision firm. She would gather proof and confront him when the time was right. Over the next few weeks, Emma became an observer in her own marriage. She noticed the perfume that clung to Nathan's shirts, the receipts for expensive dinners she hadn't attended, and the phone calls he took in hushed tones. Each discovery chipped away at the love she had once felt for him, replacing it with resolve. One evening, Nathan left for yet another business meeting. As soon as he was out the door, Emma sat down at his computer. She wasn't proud of what she was about to do, but she needed answers. Her hands shook as she navigated through his emails, her stomach sinking with every incriminating message she uncovered. The evidence was undeniable. Nathan was involved with another woman, a woman who had become a part of his life in ways Emma could no longer ignore. When Nathan returned that night, Emma was waiting for him in the living room. The fireplace crackled softly, casting shadows on her face as she sat with a folder of printed emails in her lap. "Nathan," she said, her voice steady but cold, "we need to talk." He froze, his confident demeanor faltering as he took in the seriousness of her tone. "What's this about?" She held up the folder, her expression unreadable. I know. The color drained from Nathan's face. Emma, I can explain. Don't. She interrupted, her voice sharp. Don't insult me with excuses. I've seen the emails, the messages, the receipts. You've been lying to me for months. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. I never meant for this to happen. It's complicated. It's not complicated. Emma shot back, her voice rising. You made a choice, Nathan. A choice to betray me, to destroy everything we built together. For the first time, Nathan seemed at a loss for words. He looked at her, his expression a mix of guilt and regret. But Emma didn't waver. I'm leaving, she said, her tone resolute. I deserve better than this. Nathan didn't try to stop her. Perhaps he knew it was futile. Perhaps he was too ashamed. Either way, Emma walked out of the house that night, leaving behind the life she had once cherished. It wasn't just an end. It was the beginning of a new chapter. In the weeks that followed, Emma moved into a small apartment across town. The space was modest but felt like a fresh start. She threw herself into rediscovering herself, focusing on her passions and rebuilding her confidence. But just as she began to feel a sense of stability, an unexpected twist would soon shake her world once again. A revelation that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her past, her future, and Nathan. The unexpected revelation. Emma's new life was a stark contrast to the glittering luxury she had left behind. Her apartment was small but cozy, with mismatched furniture and walls painted a warm shade of cream. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, a sanctuary away from the memories that haunted her. She filled her days with work, taking up freelance writing projects to support herself. Her nights, however, were harder. The silence pressed against her, amplifying the ache of betrayal that still lingered. But Emma was determined to move forward. She reminded herself daily that leaving Nathan was the right decision. She didn't need his lies, his excuses, or his money. What she needed was to reclaim her life, one step at a time. One crisp autumn morning, Emma woke up feeling unusually tired. Her head throbbed, and her stomach churned with a faint nausea she couldn't shake. Dismissing it as stress or a lingering cold, she pushed through her day. By noon, however, the fatigue had grown unbearable. She stared at her laptop screen, the words on her latest article blurring together. Enough, she muttered, closing her computer and grabbing her coat. She decided a walk to the pharmacy might clear her head and give her a chance to pick up something to help her feel better. The brisk air outside felt refreshing as she made her way down the tree-lined streets. The world carried on around her, children laughing in the park, couples strolling hand in hand, cars zipping by. But Emma felt disconnected from it all. Her mind raced with thoughts of work, of her future, and of Nathan. She hated that he still occupied space in her head, but moving on was proving harder than she'd anticipated. At the pharmacy, Emma wandered the aisles, her gaze falling on a shelf of pregnancy tests. Her stomach twisted as a thought she had been avoiding suddenly surfaced. Could it be? Her fingers hesitated before reaching for a box. She grabbed it quickly, shoving it into her basket and avoiding eye contact with the cashier as she checked out. Back at home, the test sat on the bathroom counter, taunting her. She stared at it for what felt like hours, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, summoning her courage, she took the test and set it aside, pacing the small bathroom as she waited for the result. When the timer buzzed, Emma's breath caught in her throat. She picked up the test, her hands trembling. Positive. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, her mind reeling. A baby. Nathan's baby. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave, sweeping away the fragile stability she had begun to build. She wasn't ready for this. Not emotionally, not financially, not in any way. Over the next few days, Emma tried to process the news. She scheduled an appointment with her doctor, who confirmed that she was 8 weeks pregnant. As the reality sank in, Emma felt a complex mix of emotions. Fear was at the forefront. Fear of the unknown, fear of doing this alone. But beneath the fear, there was also a flicker of something else. Hope. This baby, she realized, was a second chance. A chance to build a life that was hers alone, freed from Nathan's shadow. It wouldn't be easy, but Emma resolved to face it head-on. She would be strong for her child, just as she had been strong in walking away from her marriage. One evening, as Emma sorted through her finances and made plans for the future, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hesitant, she answered. "Emma," came Nathan's voice, smooth yet tentative. Her stomach dropped. "What do you want, Nathan?" she asked, her tone sharp. I heard from your sister that you weren't feeling well. I just wanted to check on you," he said, his voice laced with concern. Emma clenched her jaw. Of course, her sister would have mentioned something. "I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me." There was a pause on the line. "Emma, I know I've hurt you, more than I can ever make up for. But if there's something going on, please let me help." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Emma hesitated, torn between wanting to shut him out completely and the nagging thought that he had a right to know. "You don't get to just show up and act like you care now," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "You lost that right when you betrayed me." "I know," Nathan said softly. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. But if there's something you're not telling me, something important, I'd like to be there. For you. For us, if that's even possible." Emma's heart twisted at his words. She wasn't ready to let him back into her life, but she also couldn't deny that he deserved to know about the baby. After a long silence, she spoke. "There is something," she admitted, "but I need time to figure out how I feel about it before I share it with you." Nathan didn't push. "Take all the time you need," he said. I want you to know that I'm here if you need me." In the days that followed, Emma wrestled with the decision of whether to tell Nathan about the pregnancy. She confided in her sister, Sarah, who had always been her rock. "You have to do what's best for you and the baby," Sarah said one evening as they sat together in Emma's apartment. "If you think telling him will help, then do it. But if you think he'll just complicate things, then you don't owe him anything." Emma nodded, grateful for her sister's support. Deep down, she knew that Nathan needed to know, but the thought of seeing him again, of letting him into this new chapter of her life, filled her with dread. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a coffee shop that the decision was made for her. Emma was waiting in line for her latte when she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to see Nathan, his expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Emma," he said, his voice almost a whisper. She froze, her heart pounding. The timing felt both cruel and inevitable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice strained. "Just grabbing coffee," he said, gesturing to the counter. "I didn't expect to see you." Emma sighed, knowing there was no escaping this moment. "Can we sit and talk?" she asked, surprising even herself. Nathan nodded, and they found a quiet corner of the cafe. As they sat across from each other, Emma took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant, and it's yours." Nathan's eyes widened, shock washing over his face. For a moment, he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, his voice steady. I don't know what to say," he admitted, "but I want to be part of this. Whatever you need, I'll do it." Emma studied him, searching for signs of sincerity. She saw no trace of the man who had betrayed her, only someone who seemed genuinely shaken by the news. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said firmly. "But this isn't about us anymore. It's about the baby. If you're serious about being involved, you have to prove it. Actions, not words." Nathan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in months, Emma felt a glimmer of something she hadn't expected, the faintest hint of hope. She didn't trust Nathan yet, but perhaps, just perhaps, this new life they had created could lead to something better, for all three of them. As she left the cafe, her hand resting on her growing belly. Emma realized that the path ahead would be far from easy. But she was determined to face it, step by step, with or without Nathan by her side. Building bridges and setting boundaries. The days following Emma's revelation to Nathan felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. Tense, unpredictable, and filled with unease. She had laid down her terms, and now the ball was in his court. Nathan, to her surprise, didn't immediately flood her phone with messages or plead for reconciliation. Instead, he took a more measured approach, one that unsettled Emma because it felt unfamiliar. For the first time in years, Nathan seemed patient. It was a crisp morning when Emma heard the doorbell ring. She opened the door to find Nathan standing on her modest porch, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee and a small bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. He shifted nervously, an expression of cautious optimism on his face. "Before you slam the door," he began, "I'm not here to push or force anything. I just thought you might like these." Emma hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorknob. The coffee smelled inviting, the sunflowers a gentle reminder of a time when Nathan had known her so well. But she couldn't ignore the bitterness that lingered from his betrayal. "Thank you," she said finally, taking the flowers but leaving the door half open. "But if you think this is going to fix anything—" "I don't," he interrupted softly. "I know flowers and coffee don't make up for what I did. This isn't about fixing things. It's about showing you I want to be here for you and the baby." Emma's defenses wavered as she stepped aside to let him in. Nathan entered cautiously, his eyes scanning the small but cozy space. It was a far cry from the sprawling estate they had once shared, but it exuded Emma's warmth. Books stacked neatly on shelves, a throw blanket draped over the couch, and the faint aroma of lavender in the air. "You've made this place nice," he said, setting the coffee on the table. "I had to," Emma replied. "It's my home now." The subtle jab wasn't lost on Nathan, but he didn't retaliate. Instead, he sat down at the small dining table, his posture uncharacteristically humble. Emma joined him, her hands clasped tightly around her cup as she waited for him to speak. For the next hour, they talked, not about their past or his infidelity, but about practical matters. Nathan asked about the baby, about her health, and about what she needed. His questions were thoughtful, his tone devoid of the arrogance Emma had grown used to during their marriage. "I want to support you," he said finally. "Financially, emotionally, whatever you'll let me do." Emma narrowed her eyes. "This isn't about money, Nathan. I've been doing fine on my own." "I know," he replied, "and I admire that. But this is our child, Emma. I want to contribute in a way that doesn't overstep your boundaries." His sincerity caught her off guard, and for the first time, Emma considered the possibility that Nathan might actually mean what he said. Still, her trust was fragile, and she wasn't ready to let him in completely. "Fine," she said cautiously. "You can come to the doctor's appointments, but don't think this means I've forgiven you or that we're going back to how things were." Nathan nodded. "Understood." True to his word, Nathan began attending Emma's prenatal appointments. He arrived on time, often with snacks or a book about parenting in hand. During the appointments, he asked questions, took notes, and listened intently to the doctor's advice. Emma couldn't deny that his presence made the daunting process slightly less overwhelming. One afternoon, as they sat in the waiting room, Emma glanced over at Nathan. He was flipping through a parenting book, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're really taking this seriously, aren't you?" she asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I have to. I messed up, Emma. Big time. But I don't want to mess this up too." His words, though simple, carried a weight that Emma couldn't ignore. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. The walls she had built around her heart remained, but they no longer felt as impenetrable. As the weeks turned into months, Emma found herself relying on Nathan more than she had anticipated. He offered to drive her to appointments, helped her assemble the nursery furniture, and even cooked dinner for her on nights when she was too exhausted to stand. His actions spoke louder than any apology could, but Emma still struggled to fully trust him. One evening, as they finished assembling a crib, Emma sat on the floor, her hands resting on her growing belly. Nathan sat across from her, wiping sweat from his brow. "You didn't have to do all this," Emma said, her voice softer than usual. "I wanted to," Nathan replied. "It's the least I can do." Emma studied him, searching for any hint of ulterior motives, but all she saw was a man who seemed genuinely committed to making amends. It was confusing, frustrating, and strangely comforting all at once. One day, while organizing the nursery, Emma found a box of old photos tucked away in a corner. Curious, she opened it and was greeted by memories of happier times, her and Nathan's wedding day, vacations, and moments of laughter that now felt like they belonged to someone else. Nathan walked in and froze when he saw the box. "I didn't realize you still had those," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure what to do with them," Emma admitted. "Part of me wanted to throw them out, but I couldn't." Nathan sat beside her, his expression somber. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Emma, but I hope, someday, you'll find it in your heart to see that I've changed." Emma looked at him, her emotions swirling. She wanted to believe him, to let herself feel the hope that was slowly growing within her. But the pain of his betrayal still lingered, and she wasn't ready to let it go. "I don't know if I can," she said honestly, "but I do see that you're trying, and I appreciate it." It wasn't the resolution Nathan had hoped for, but it was a step forward, a small but significant bridge between the past and the present. As the months went on, Emma and Nathan settled into a tentative partnership. They were no longer husband and wife, but they were parents-to-be, united by their shared love for the child growing inside her. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, as they sat on the couch reviewing the list of baby names, Nathan turned to Emma and said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, surprised. "For giving me a chance to be part of this," he said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." Emma nodded, her heart softening just a little. "You're here for the baby, Nathan, and that's what matters." As they continued discussing names, Emma realized that, for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of peace. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was no longer walking it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The cracks in the armor. The nursery was nearly complete, painted a soft, calming lavender with delicate clouds stenciled along the walls. Emma stood in the doorway, her hand resting on her swollen belly, admiring the progress. She had never imagined building a nursery without the warmth of a loving partner by her side, but life had taken a turn she hadn't expected. Now the room symbolized hope, a fresh start for her and her baby. Nathan had helped with much of the heavy lifting, showing up for her in ways she hadn't anticipated, but the scars of his betrayal lingered like shadows in the corners of her heart. Weeks had passed since Nathan's first appearance at the doctor's office, and Emma couldn't deny he had kept his word. He showed up for every appointment, texted her daily to check on her well-being, and even accompanied her to prenatal yoga classes when she needed a ride. His consistency was disarming, especially for someone she had once labeled as selfish and detached. Still, Emma struggled to reconcile the Nathan she was seeing now with the man who had so easily shattered her trust. Was his transformation genuine, or was it a calculated effort to win her back? The question gnawed at her, keeping her guard up even as she appreciated his support. One rainy afternoon, Emma found herself at her usual coffee shop, typing furiously on her laptop. Freelance writing had become both her livelihood and her escape, allowing her to channel her thoughts into something productive. She was editing a client's project when Nathan walked in, his coat soaked from the downpour outside. "I thought you might be here," he said, setting a cup of tea on the table beside her. "Decaf, with honey and lemon. Figured you'd need it after last night." Emma raised an eyebrow, both surprised and suspicious. "Last night wasn't that bad." You texted me at 3 a.m. about a leg cramp and said you couldn't sleep, he reminded her with a faint smile. I figured you might need a pick-me-up. Her cheeks flushed at the memory. Pregnancy had turned her body into something unfamiliar, and Nathan's calm responses to her late-night complaints were an unexpected source of comfort. She hated how much she was starting to rely on him. Thanks, she said, taking the tea. But you didn't have to go out of your way. I didn't mind, he replied, pulling out the chair across from her. How's the article coming along? Emma hesitated, torn between wanting to shut him out and feeling grateful for his interest. It's fine, just a few edits left. Nathan nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than she expected. You're amazing, you know. Balancing work, the baby, and everything else. I don't know how you do it. Emma looked away, the compliment catching her off guard. She wasn't used to Nathan praising her like this. It felt genuine, unguarded, and almost too vulnerable to handle. I just do what I have to, she said, her tone neutral. That's what being a mom is about. Later that evening, Emma sat in her apartment, reflecting on the day. Nathan's presence in her life had become a strange paradox, comforting yet unsettling. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was trying to rebuild something that was irreparably broken. But there were moments, like today, when she caught glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with years ago. It made her question everything: his intentions, her own feelings, and whether forgiveness was even possible. The next day, as they painted the final details in the nursery, Nathan brought up a topic Emma had been dreading. Have you thought about where the baby will stay? He asked, dipping his brush into a can of white paint. Emma tensed, her brush hovering midair. What do you mean? I mean, after the baby's born, he clarified. I'd like to help. Maybe even have some time with them at my place. Emma put down her brush, her heart racing. Nathan, I don't even know if I trust you to be in the same room as them without me, let alone take them overnight. His expression darkened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face her. I get it, Emma. I do. But I'm trying to show you that I'm serious about being a father. This isn't just about making up for the past. It's about doing what's right for our child. Emma crossed her arms, her defenses rising. And what happens if you get bored? Or if someone else catches your attention? Are you just going to disappear like you did before? Nathan flinched, her words cutting deeper than she had intended. He took a step closer, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I made mistakes, Emma. Big ones. But this baby changes everything. I'm not the same man I was before, and I'm willing to prove it to you, even if it takes the rest of my life. The intensity in his eyes made her falter. She wanted to believe him, but the pain of his betrayal still loomed too large. She turned away, focusing on the wall in front of her. We'll see, she said finally, her tone cool. Actions speak louder than words. In the weeks that followed, Nathan continued to show up. He attended childbirth classes with Emma, despite being the only man in a room full of expectant mothers. He spent hours researching car seats and cribs, texting Emma lists of pros and cons for each model. He even started taking parenting workshops, surprising her with his determination to be prepared. But Emma wasn't the only one noticing Nathan's efforts. Her sister, Sarah, had grown skeptical of his motives. Are you sure he's not just doing this to get back in your good graces? Sarah asked one evening over dinner. Emma sighed, poking at her salad. I don't know, Sarah. Part of me thinks he's changed, but the other part can't forget what he did. You don't owe him anything, Sarah said firmly. He's the one who ruined your marriage, not you. Don't let him guilt you into letting him back into your life. I'm not, Emma replied. But he's the baby's father, and I want to give him a chance to prove himself. For the baby's sake, not mine. Despite her reservations, Emma began to see small but significant changes in Nathan. He seemed more patient, more present, and more willing to listen. One evening, as they sat in the living room reviewing the birthing plan, Emma found herself opening up in a way she hadn't intended. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm not enough for this baby? What if I can't do it?" Nathan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You're going to be an amazing mom," he said softly. "You already are. And you're not alone in this, Emma. I'm here, whether you want me to be or not." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, unwilling to let him see her vulnerability. "We'll see," she said again, the words now feeling more like a mantra than a dismissal. As Emma's due date approached, the tension between them began to ease. They fell into a tentative rhythm, a partnership born not of trust but of necessity. And yet, Emma couldn't deny that Nathan's presence brought a sense of stability she hadn't felt in months. One night, as they stood in the nursery, admiring their handiwork, Nathan turned to her and said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, surprised. "For letting me be part of this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'll never take it for granted." Emma looked at him, her heart torn between hope and caution. She didn't reply, but the faint smile she gave him was enough to convey that, for now, she was willing to let him try. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Emma felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: the possibility of healing. The night that changed everything. The final weeks of Emma's pregnancy were a whirlwind of anticipation and anxiety. The nursery was complete, the hospital bag packed, and her apartment prepared for the arrival of the tiny new life growing inside her. But while she was ready in practical terms, emotionally, she felt anything but. The tension between her and Nathan remained, an unspoken divide neither of them could fully bridge. He was present, attentive, and consistent, yet Emma's heart hesitated to trust him again. She had built a fragile peace for herself and her baby, but Nathan's persistent efforts to be part of their lives tested the walls she had so carefully constructed. One evening, Emma sat on her couch, her feet propped up on a pillow as she rubbed her swollen ankles. A storm raged outside, the wind howling against the windows. The flickering glow of a candle and the soft hum of her favorite classical playlist provided the only light and sound in the room. She closed her eyes, trying to savor the rare moment of quiet. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the stillness. It was Nathan. "Nathan, how are you feeling? Do you need anything?" Emma sighed, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard before she typed back a short reply. "I'm fine. Just tired." Almost immediately, he responded, "I can drop by if you need me. Just say the word." She rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a faint smile. His persistent care was both annoying and endearing. Instead of replying, she set the phone down and leaned back, determined to enjoy her solitude. It wasn't long before her peace was shattered. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through her abdomen, causing her to gasp. She doubled over, clutching her belly as the pain radiated through her body. This wasn't like the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd experienced before. It was more intense, more real. Panic set in as another contraction followed, leaving her breathless. She reached for her phone with trembling hands and dialed Sarah, her sister and emergency contact. "Sarah." Emma gasped when her sister picked up. "I think it's time." The contractions. "Oh my God. Are you okay? How far apart are they?" Sarah's voice was laced with concern. "About 7 minutes," Emma managed to say through gritted teeth. "But they're getting stronger." "I'm on my way," Sarah said. "Don't worry. We'll get you to the hospital." As the call ended, another wave of pain washed over Emma. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. But as she tried to calm herself, she realized something. She didn't want to face this moment alone. Against her better judgment, she opened her messages and typed a quick text to Nathan. "It's happening. I'm heading to the hospital." His reply came almost instantly. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything without me." By the time Sarah arrived, Emma was struggling to stay composed. She leaned on her sister as they made their way to the car, her breaths shallow and rapid. "Are you sure you want Nathan there?" Sarah asked as she helped Emma into the passenger seat. Emma hesitated before nodding. "He deserves to be there for this. It's his baby too." They arrived at the hospital just as Nathan pulled into the parking lot. He jumped out of his car and rushed to Emma's side, his expression a mixture of panic and determination. "Are you okay?" he asked, taking her hand. "I'm fine," Emma said through clenched teeth, "but we need to get inside now." Nathan and Sarah helped her into a wheelchair, and a nurse guided them to the maternity ward. The room was bright and sterile, the air filled with the hum of machines and the occasional murmur of voices. Emma's heart raced as the reality of what was about to happen sank in. The next few hours were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and emotion. Nathan stayed by Emma's side, holding her hand through every contraction, his voice steady as he encouraged her to breathe. Despite the tension between them, his presence was a lifeline in the chaos. At one point, when the pain became unbearable, Emma turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, you can," Nathan said firmly, his grip on her hand tightening. "You're the strongest person I know. You've got this, Emma." His words, though simple, gave her the strength she needed to push through. After hours of labor, the moment finally came. The sound of the baby's first cry filled the room, bringing tears to Emma's eyes. She collapsed back against the pillows, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the tiny, squirming infant before placing him on Emma's chest. Emma's breath hitched as she looked down at her son. His skin was pink and wrinkled, his tiny hands grasping at the air. He was perfect. Nathan stood frozen beside her, his eyes fixed on the baby. Slowly, he reached out, his hand trembling as he touched his son for the first time. "He's beautiful," Nathan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, all the pain and betrayal faded into the background. Nothing mattered except the little life they had brought into the world. The days that followed were both exhilarating and overwhelming. Emma and Nathan worked together to care for their son, whom they named Lucas. Nathan surprised her with his dedication, waking up for late-night feedings, changing diapers, and learning how to soothe Lucas when he cried. Despite her lingering doubts, Emma couldn't deny that Nathan was proving himself. He was no longer the selfish, arrogant man she had once known. He was present, patient, and unwavering in his commitment to Lucas and to her. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, watching Lucas sleep in his bassinet, Nathan turned to Emma. "I know I've hurt you," he said quietly, "and I know I can't undo the past, but I hope I've shown you that I'm not the same person I was." Emma looked at him, her heart torn. She wanted to believe him, to let herself feel the hope that had been growing within her, but forgiveness wasn't something she could give easily. "You've changed," she admitted, "but it's going to take time, Nathan. A lot of time." "I'll wait," he said simply, "as long as it takes." That night, as Emma lay in bed, listening to the soft sounds of Lucas breathing, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't walking it alone. Nathan's actions had begun to rebuild the trust he had shattered, brick by brick. For the sake of Lucas, and perhaps for herself, Emma decided to take it one day at a time. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And for the first time, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. A new chapter begins. The weeks after Lucas's birth were a blur of sleepless nights, quiet moments, and a whirlwind of emotions. Emma's days revolved around feeding, changing, and soothing her newborn son, who had quickly become the center of her world. Lucas was a calm baby, his tiny coos and gentle cries filling the once quiet apartment with life. But with every milestone and late-night feeding, Emma was reminded of how much her life had changed and how much she still had to figure out. Nathan had kept his promise. He was there, every single day, showing up not just for Lucas, but for Emma as well. He brought groceries, folded laundry, and took over when Emma was too exhausted to move. His presence was steady and unwavering, but Emma couldn't help but wonder if it was sustainable. Was this Nathan's way of proving his love, or was he trying to redeem himself for the guilt he carried? One rainy afternoon, Emma sat on the couch with Lucas nestled against her chest. Nathan was across the room, assembling a new stroller he had insisted on buying. She watched him silently, marveling at how effortlessly he had stepped into fatherhood. He wasn't the Nathan she had once known, the polished businessman who had prioritized his career and ego over everything else. This Nathan was different, softer, more patient. "Do you think we're doing okay?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the soft patter of rain against the window. Nathan looked up, his brow furrowing in thought. "What do you mean?" "With Lucas," she said, gesturing to the sleeping baby in her arms. "I feel like I'm constantly second-guessing myself, like I'm not enough." Nathan set down the stroller pieces and walked over to her. He crouched beside the couch, his gaze meeting hers. "Emma, you're more than enough. You're an amazing mom. Lucas is lucky to have you." She searched his face for any sign of insincerity, but found none. His words carried a weight she couldn't ignore, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of reassurance. Maybe, just maybe, she was doing something right. As the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself relying on Nathan more than she had anticipated. He had become her partner in ways she hadn't expected, and though their relationship was far from what it once was, it had evolved into something new, something fragile but meaningful. One evening, Nathan surprised her by cooking dinner. The smell of roasted vegetables and baked chicken filled the apartment as Emma sat at the table, feeding Lucas from a bottle. She watched Nathan move around the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly messy. It was a side of him she had rarely seen during their marriage, and it stirred something inside her she wasn't ready to name. "I didn't know you could cook," Emma said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Nathan glanced over his shoulder, a sheepish smile on his face. "I didn't, really. But I've been watching videos and trying to learn. Figured it was about time I picked up a new skill." Emma chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Who are you? And what have you done with Nathan?" He grinned, but his expression quickly turned serious. "I'm trying to be better, Emma. For Lucas. For you." Her smile faded, replaced by a cautious look. "Nathan, I appreciate everything you're doing. But I need you to understand that this doesn't erase the past. It doesn't make everything okay." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm not trying to erase it. I just want to show you that I'm not that person anymore." Emma nodded, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe him, but the wounds of his betrayal still ran deep. Trust, she knew, would take time, if it could ever truly be rebuilt. One weekend, Nathan suggested they take Lucas for a walk in the park. The crisp autumn air was refreshing, and the leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. Emma hesitated at first, reluctant to spend more time with Nathan than necessary, but she eventually agreed. She figured it would be good for Lucas to get some fresh air, and for her to clear her head. They strolled through the park together, the stroller rolling smoothly along the paved paths. Families and couples passed by, their laughter and chatter creating a lively backdrop. Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of longing as she watched them. She had once imagined a life like that for herself, a happy family, untouched by betrayal or heartbreak. Nathan seemed to sense her unease. "This is nice, isn't it?" he said, his tone careful. Emma glanced at him, her expression guarded. "It is, but it's complicated." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the stroller. "I know it is. I'm not expecting anything, Emma. I just want to be here, however you'll let me." For a moment, they walked in silence, the tension between them softened by the gentle rustle of leaves and the sound of Lucas cooing in his stroller. It was a fragile truce, but one that gave Emma a glimmer of hope. As the months went on, Emma began to see more of the man Nathan was trying to become. He threw himself into fatherhood with a devotion that surprised her, attending parenting classes, reading books, and even joining a support group for new dads. He wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes and had moments of doubt, but his effort was undeniable. Emma, too, found herself changing. The bitterness she had clung to for so long began to loosen its grip, replaced by a cautious openness. She still wasn't ready to fully forgive Nathan, but she could no longer ignore the progress they had made together. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching Lucas sleep in his bassinet, Nathan turned to her. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice hesitant. Emma glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" "Do you think there's a chance for us?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. "Not now. Maybe, but someday." The question caught her off guard, and she looked away, her thoughts swirling. She wanted to give him an answer, but the truth was, she didn't know. Forgiveness was a journey, not a destination, and she was still navigating its twists and turns. "I don't know, Nathan," she said finally, her voice soft. "But I do know that Lucas deserves parents who can work together and support each other. That's all I can promise right now." He nodded, his expression a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "That's enough for me." As Emma lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the baby monitor, she thought about Nathan's question. The possibility of a future together was both terrifying and intriguing. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, but now, for the first time, she wondered if it was worth trying to let them down. Life, she realized, was full of second chances, and while she wasn't ready to give Nathan hers just yet, she was willing to keep moving forward, one step at a time. For Lucas, for herself, and perhaps, someday, for them.